NASA says this present time is the best opportunity to concentrate on the world Venus. This follows the new disclosure of possible life on the planet. If you somehow ended up taking a look at NASA's records from the 1960s, you'd see the Space Association calling Venus a planet of punishment. At the same time, Mars transformed into our fate target. Such mindful naming of the most profound planets isn't an event during the wild space race period. The Soviet Union was centered on sending expensive missions to Venus. The harsh planet showed almost no opportunities for life. Yet the Soviet space program didn't decommission the Venera program until the fall of the empire. According to deGrasse Tyson, we finally realized the reason why. Join us as we dissect the declassified photos from Venus taken by the Soviet Union. The fall of the Soviet Union was dynamic in more ways than one. Not only did it shift the global trajectory of the world, but the collapse of the empire also sank various secrets with it. The fact that the Soviets had a significant penchant for secrets, from running the most extraordinary intelligence office on the planet to being cryptic about their potential extraterrestrial contact, means the previous superpower holds various mysteries within itself. Actually, before the United States of America dominated most planetary undertakings in space, the Soviet Union was leading the game. While the empire has a long history of successful and unsuccessful space missions, its greatest fixation was on the inner, harsh planet Venus. In the Russian language, you'd see Venus as Venera, and hence the resulting name of the mission that spanned from 1961 to 1983. During the same time, the United States of America was busy with sending its missions to the moon, so in an astute way, the Soviets decided to use their resources elsewhere. We can't say that the entire obsession with the second planet from our sun is odd. Did the Soviets intend to utilize the planet's surface as a practical and powerful military establishment, or were they possibly hoping to colonize the planet after searching for any forms of life up there? It's very hard to say why the empire was focused on the harsh planet. Since the Soviets named these exploration excursions during the Cold War, they weren't exactly forthcoming with their purposes and objectives. Honestly, all that we know about the Venusian missions is based on declassified and unarchived evidence, and even then, it's difficult to pinpoint what the Soviets were looking for and if they revealed the mysteries of Venus. The Soviets didn't land on Venus just once, twice, or even 3 times. That's just scratching the surface. The Soviets launched 28 expensive rockets to the enigmatic planet, and 13 of those entered the Venusian atmosphere, while 8 landed successfully. Such complex missions had placed the Soviets in a leading position in space exploration initiatives. Sure, the United States of America was a close second, yet NASA was more captivated by satellites and innovative designs than researching life on planets. Its interest in Mars came later, neither particularly good nor particularly bad. Your history book may not tell you this, but the Soviet space program was the first organization to send a probe into the atmosphere of a planet other than Earth. It also had another heap of firsts on its resume. The USSR became the first state to achieve a soft landing on another planet, bringing back images and sounds from the surface of another planet. That's right, the Soviets had their own one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind moment well before the United States. So why do we so rarely hear about such achievement missions? Remember what we said about the Soviet penchant for keeping secrets? That's just one of the many reasons for the oversight of the Soviet space program. Back in 1992, the renowned organization was decommissioned in the aftermath of the USSR, and the organization had to be resurrected with a new Russian identity, Roscosmos. A lot of its historical data was either lost or destroyed. This is exactly why we don't have a clear answer for why the Soviets launched 28 spacecraft into the Venusian atmosphere. However, if we had to make the most accurate guess, perhaps the Soviet decision to explore Venus was about cost efficiency more than anything else. This is not to say that the space program wasn't hopeful about the planet's potential. They were looking for usable water, the presence of solar radiation, and the general characteristics of the planet. Without a series of these space missions, it would have been nearly impossible to measure Venus' high temperatures and dense atmosphere. Today, various astronomers avoid believing that the harsh planet could support life. The temperatures up there are high enough to melt lead, and water is scarce. Furthermore, due to its dense atmosphere, the atmospheric pressure on Venus is several times that of Earth. However, these are very recent and modern developments, and to disregard the USSR's contribution to the exploration of Venus is akin to altering history. As far as the Soviets were concerned, Venus was worth exploring, even if it was just to stir up the space race. Researching more habitable planets like Mars wasn't exactly off the table, but it was more expensive than sending probes. To Venus, everything basically decreases. The separation from Earth to another divine body on normal is just 40 million kilometers away from our home, while Mars, on normal, is 250 million kilometers away. Such gigantic contrasts in distance amount to extremist contrasts in cost. Likewise, if the US of America wasn't the world's biggest economy, it would never have been easy to explore Mars. Various reports suggest that Soviet missions were problematic and had huge technical gaps. Obviously, the rockets weren't fit to cover grandiose distances. Also, the organization had an unfortunate history of losing contact with its rockets. So, it makes sense why the Soviet space program was picking a more limited and closer excursion that would yield results. Anyway, if we try not to consider the space race in this setting, the narrative of the Venera missions would be incomplete. The US of America wasn't even on the space map at the point when the Soviet program launched the first artificial satellite, Sputnik 1, in 1957. This move intensified the space tussle and maintained its strength. Anyway, what's really captivating is the reason the US focused on the moon. Besides obscure locales, NASA had a series of failures with its Venus missions during the 1960s. The U.S. Space Office wound up in a gridlock called the Venus Curse. Every time they launched a probe into the Venusian climate, it turned out badly. This is exactly when the Soviet Union saw an opportunity to profit from NASA's failures. Around that time, both the U.S. and USSR were determined to win the space race. The most logical undertaking was to exploit two distinct options. It was a quiet observation, seeing very clearly that the Soviet space program had seized Earth's sister planet as the most significant achievement in the space tussle, accomplishing something that its major rival had failed to do. Despite the Union's limited resources and stumbling government, it repeatedly sent missions to Venus to secure its winning position against the U.S. In contrast to NASA's focus on the moon, this strategic division wasn't without hostility and deceptive exposure. To hide their critical failures with Venus, the American organization was provoked to mock the USSR's obsession with the planet. In popular media, Venus was labeled as the unpleasant planet, while Mars became man's destiny. These names didn't matter to the Soviets. Their mission was to demonstrate superiority over the Americans, and they weren't unsuccessful in doing so. The Venera missions are almost forgotten in present history. Despite their dated origins, those missions were significantly complex, advanced, and ambitious. In fact, if we want to pick an event that marked the beginning of the space age, the Venera explorations would take the lead. Harking back to the 1950s, the Soviets began experimenting with the design and technical details of the probes, and for the next 30 years, they continued to build and launch interplanetary spacecraft as part of the Venera program. Since the program was running alongside a very tumultuous Cold War, the Soviets were committed to enhancing their capabilities. Luckily for them, the early years of the conflict provided them with more heavy lifting capacity than the U.S. of America. That advantage turned out to be quite helpful. Building on their abilities, the USSR began to assemble and launch larger rockets that were designed to withstand high altitudes and long durations. The Soviets rushed to experiment with both manned and unmanned rockets simultaneously. The Soviet academic community was working on a series of calculations and assessments to create precise trajectories for the Venus missions. Behind the scenes, their Mars programs were also running successfully. For the Soviet Space Organization, nothing was more important than developing complex instrumentation for these probes. This led to the greatest breakthrough in the history of space exploration. In 1966, the Soviet office launched Venera 3, making it the first artificial probe to enter the atmosphere of Venus and successfully engage with the planet's surface. This critical achievement heightened the competition between the two superpowers. Unlike the American missions, which were fraught with failures and gridlocks, the Soviet program continued to make progress. Despite the program's constant advancement, the USSR managed to send successful probes into the Venusian climate. The most significant issue with this approach was limited design capacity. The Soviets quickly overcame their design problems and launched the most advanced rockets of the Venera program in the 1970s. Their standout capability allowed them to conduct the first dual launches of Venera 4 and Venera 5. According to most historians, this was the most interesting decade in the history of space exploration. Indeed, the U.S. of America attempted to come up with similar launch plans. So, why did the Soviet office choose dual launches into Venus? To understand this, you must recognize that interplanetary travel requires advanced instrumentation to gather the highest level of data and evidence. Clearly, the spacecraft were first launched to survey the planet's surface. This is exactly what happened with Venera 4. Since the launch went smoothly, and the rocket entered the atmosphere of Venus successfully, the Soviet program proceeded with Venera 5. It wasn't just a repetition of the first launch. The subsequent spacecraft was exceptionally intended to gather one-of-a-kind information about the planet. At the end of the day, the Soviets planned to break through boundaries of temperature, climatic strain, and radiation on Venus. They didn't have to wait too long for their responses. By the mid-1970s, the Soviet program was entering the most progressive period of the Venera missions. All that the USSR had done up to that point was about research and development. It was about ensuring that their designs and advances were enhanced. It was also about perfecting the techniques and mechanics of interplanetary travel. However, for the second decade of Venera missions, the Soviet Union intended to lead exploratory missions. The best and most fascinating launch of this period was Venera 7. As the 11th Soviet probe entered Venus' atmosphere, it became the first spacecraft to transmit data from another planet. The planet's high temperatures, density, and surface pressures were already noted. At this point, the Soviets were attempting to record Venusian sounds. The next major accomplishment for the program came in the mid-1980s. Venera 13 had outperformed all previous interplanetary studies in terms of complexity. This spacecraft was the first to capture color panoramic photos of Venus' surface. Simultaneously, the Soviet program launched Venera 14 to gather similar data about the planet's surface. As the Soviet Union was one of the first nations to discover and recognize Venus, the Russian Space Agency has renewed its aspirations for Venus missions. VAD is a planned joint mission between Roscosmos and NASA to study the atmosphere and surface of Venus. The acronym VENERID represents Venera in Russian. It is expected to mean enduring. The mission is set to launch in the late 2020s or early 2030s and aims to study the planet's atmosphere, geological history, and search for signs of any ongoing or past habitability. The spacecraft will include an orbiter, a lander, and possibly a balloon to study the planet's atmosphere in detail. The legacy of the Venera missions extends far beyond their technological accomplishments and global implications. These missions, initiated by the Soviet Union during the height of the Cold War, represented a pinnacle of human creativity and determination in exploring the universe despite facing numerous challenges and hardships. The Soviets persevered in their quest to uncover the mysteries of Venus, a planet long thought to be hostile and inhospitable to life. One of the most critical aspects of the Venera missions was their pioneering use of robotic probes to study planetary environments and surfaces. These missions paved the way for future exploration beyond Earth's neighborhood and laid the groundwork for our understanding of planetary science. The data collected by the Venera spacecraft provided valuable insights into Venus' extreme environment, including its scorching temperatures, crushing atmospheric pressure, and toxic climate dominated by carbon dioxide. Furthermore, the technological advancements achieved through the Venera program had broader implications for space exploration overall. The development of durable heat-resistant materials, robust communication systems, and reliable landing techniques were crucial milestones that contributed to subsequent missions to other planets, like Mars and beyond. The lessons learned from the Venera missions continue to inform spacecraft design and operational strategies in contemporary space exploration efforts. Beyond their scientific and technological significance, the Venera missions also had profound cultural and political repercussions during the space race era. These missions symbolized the competition between superpowers for dominance in space exploration. For the Soviet Union, achieving success in the Venera missions was not just about scientific discovery, but also about demonstrating technological prowess and ideological superiority over the United States. The international community closely monitored each Venera mission, recognizing their significance in expanding humanity's understanding of the solar system. The successful soft landing of Venera 7 on Venus in 1970 marked a major milestone as the first spacecraft to send data from another planet's surface. This achievement highlighted the Soviet Union's ability to overcome the tremendous challenges posed by Venus' harsh conditions. In addition to scientific instruments, the Venera spacecraft carried cameras that captured the first close-up images of Venus' surface. These images revealed a rugged terrain dominated by rocky plains and volcanic features, providing scientists with valuable geological insights into the planet's history and evolution. The panoramic photos taken by later missions, such as Venera 13 and 14, further enhanced our understanding of Venus' surface morphology and structure. Despite their successes, the Venera missions also experienced their share of failures and difficulties. Several missions either failed to reach Venus or experienced technical breakdowns that prevented them from sending data back to Earth. The challenges of operating in Venus' hostile environment, including extreme temperatures exceeding 450 degrees Celsius (842 degrees Fahrenheit) and corrosive sulfuric acid clouds, posed significant engineering challenges for spacecraft design and operation. Nevertheless, the perseverance and dedication of Soviet scientists and engineers involved in the Venera program paved the way for future missions to Venus and other celestial bodies. The legacy of the Venera missions lives on in the ongoing exploration of Venus by space agencies worldwide, including NASA's upcoming VT mission in collaboration with Roscosmos. Looking ahead, the VT mission aims to build upon the accomplishments of its predecessors by deploying advanced instruments to study Venus' atmosphere, surface geology, and potential signs of past or present habitability. The mission represents a collaborative effort to unravel the remaining mysteries of Earth's closest planetary neighbor and to expand our understanding of the conditions that could support life beyond our own planet.